And this is going to have some numbers from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. They do a big study every year. And according to them, the median loss per fraud case is $130,000. Now, fortunately, the times when I've experienced it, it's been a lot less than that, but 130,000 is pretty substantial. 22% of the cases, 1 out of 5 roughly, are more than $1 million. And I know some contractors that have lost this much or more. They don't even know how much it's cost them. And I think that the biggest problem for a lot of them, it isn't even the financial consequences, it's the sense of betrayal. You put faith and trust in people, and at times you're let down. The median duration, fraud schemes last 16 months. You know, half of them are 16 or less than 16 months, half of them are more than 16 months. That's a long time for this to go on. Now, there are techniques, there are things that you can do that will reduce that and hopefully will expose any type of fraud if it's occurring much sooner. Really what we want to do is we want to prevent it altogether. Now, this is important, and I'll get back to this later, but tips are the most common method that's used to detect fraud. 40% of all fraud schemes are revealed because of a tip. And then the next is internal audits, which is 15%, and management reviews, which are 13%. Employees provide over half the tips. A third come from outside parties. And when you have some type of fraud hotline, you're going to be much more successful in detecting fraud. You can see the number of cases detected when there's no hotline is 30%. When there are a hotline, it's 46%. Small business gets hurt more than large business by fraud. This is sort of a shock, but I think it's because large businesses are better at identifying it and correcting it. But small businesses are actually, the financial impact is twice what it is for a larger company. Weak internal controls are responsible for half of all frauds, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today, is how to fix that. Here's another interesting thing. Look at the left side. You'll see that 85% of fraudsters displayed at least one behavioral red flag. So that's something that we're going to look at and we're going to talk about. And fraudsters who had been with their company longer stole twice as much. 5 years tenure, 200,000 median loss. Less than 5 years, 100,000 median loss. So because you have a long-term employee, it could be worse if that employee decides to do something to rip the company off. Only 4% of the perps had a prior fraud conviction. I don't know about prior convictions elsewhere, and a majority of the victims recovered nothing. Incarceration because of fraud, referrals to prosecution has been declining. The number one reason, fear of bad publicity. And this is actually, I think, is a big mistake, and we'll talk about that at the very end. In a study of certified fraud examiners, the median estimate for the cost of fraud was 5% of company revenue. And that's a pretty significant number when you think about it. So what can we do to stop this? What can we do to prevent fraud? What can we do to protect our companies, protect our assets? I'm going to look mostly at from an internal perspective, but there'll be a little bit from an external as well. Surprisingly, one of the best things we can do is just to have a company code of conduct. By establishing a code of conduct, we found that the companies that are victims of fraud that have a code of conduct were lost 50% less than those that didn't have a code of conduct. That sounds kind of surprising to me, and it might be correlated to the size of company. I think large companies are more likely to have a code of conduct, but I think it's a good practice anyway. We have ours kind of built into our values, our company values that we share. And we have one about honesty. We don't lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. And that's something that we believe in and we try to live by it. So one of the things you want to do is take inventory regularly. And if you are a distributor, you're probably already doing this, but as much as you can, take inventory on a real-time basis using barcode scanners. Nobody likes to take inventory. Any business that I've worked in where we've had to take inventory, that was always a day that I just hated. But I hate even more when inventory grows legs and walks out of the building. So it's something that you should do. You should do it on a regular basis. And it's something that you don't necessarily do on the same date every month or the same time. So you vary it a little bit. Have employees use their personal credit cards instead of assigning company credit cards. There's a cost associated with this, and cover the cost of the employee's credit card. It's cheaper in the long run. The employees should prefer it because they can ultimately get reward points from their airlines or hotel chains or whatever they want. That's fine, but having them use their personal credit cards and then having to expense items is a much safer and better practice. Okay, change your passwords on all your bank accounts, change your passwords on your credit cards, change your passwords on all of your logins, and you need to do it, and I would say regularly, but it's almost on an irregular basis. But if nothing else, set a date at the first of the month to change a password. Now let's talk about how you change it. So if we look at these up here, we can see that Kitty, okay, it's an okay password. We can do one Kitty, that's better because we got a number with it. And then we do one KI77 for the T's and a Y, and that's much better. You can see the same thing with Susan, Susan53, Susan53. Jellyfish, Jelly22 fish, Jelly22 fish, and we use the $ for an S. Those are some of the techniques that you can use to come up with a better password. I read one time about one of the things to do is sit at your office where you normally access your computer and look around at some of the items and obstacles that are in your office, and you can use those to help you provide prompts if anybody has trouble remembering passwords. That's one of my problems. I'm always having to get new passwords because I forget what I did. Here's some other techniques that you can use. If you want to use dog lover, so do dog.lov3r, and you change the cap basis. Instead of capping the first letter, you should cap the second letter or the third or something like that, or cap every fifth letter. So there's another one for dog lover. I love my dog, exclamation points. Dogs are my best friends. So you can easily see how we're substituting letters and numbers in different ways that makes it harder for the brute force hackers to try to figure this out. So one of the things you can do is instead of the letter L, you use a 1. Instead of the letter Z, you use a 2. Instead of an E, you use a 3, and so on, right down this list. Okay, and that's a good technique and a good practice to get in. And you've got your QWERTY keyboard, and if you look at the number that's associated with each of the letters in the top row, that's another way that you can do a substitution, and that's another effective technique. So the challenge is to make stuff that you can remember without making it vulnerable. You can also use a password wallet. I've tried one of these. Personally, I found that it was kind of a pain for me, and I was much better off if I just have a password strategy, which I have, and I have a different password for every website. And so when I go through and change, I change, periodically, every one of them. Okay, another thing to do is to have a P.O. box. I can tell you, Service Nation, we were established in 2002. We've had 1, 2, 3, 4. We're in our fifth location, fifth physical location as the company has grown, and we've had to grab new places. But we've had one P.O. box the entire time. Now, one of the reasons the P.O. box is important, there are 2 people that have keys to our P.O. box. I'm one of them, and I'm the one that usually goes and checks the mail. You always want to have a principal check the mail. I know that sounds, kind of like that's a waste of time, but in the intro that I wrote about for Colleen to send out about this fraud presentation, the contractor who found all the 941s in the desk drawer from the IRS or found the mail from the IRS about failure to pay the 941s, all that was mailed to the business. The bookkeeper picked up the mail and sorted through it before the owner ever saw it. If it went to a P.O. box, he would have identified this quickly and early in that stage, and he would not have had to spend a decade digging himself out of a hole. So that's one of the tips that you have about using that. If you're not going to use a PO box, then have all bank statements, have all IRS and government notifications sent to your home. They sent to your home address. Just, make sure that you have a control in place for the mail and for important mail, and instruct people that you want all mail to go to a PO box or something like, your home. It's a constant battle. In our company, people want to put the physical address and have people mail things there. We don't want that. We want it to go to the PO box, especially because who knows, in 5 years we might move again, and now we've got a bunch of mail going to a location that we won't be at and will have to be forwarded. Another tip on the PO box, and this came from my CPA. When we started the company, he said, get a PO box. There's a post office 2 miles from your house. Every day, drive to the post office to check the mail and log your mileage at that point. And then until the end of the day, when you return to that PO box, then you log your miles again. So I had 2 miles of personal travel every day to commute to the PO box, and then 2 miles to commute from the PO box back to the house. Everything else was business related. So that's just another little kind of tip on how to take a tax advantage from your PO box. Okay, petty cash is nice. There are times when it is really useful, but it needs to be secured, and it should never be a lot of it. Keep it to a minimum, but make sure you got a cash box that is locked and you've got limited access to the keys. One of the things that's useful if anybody does any international travel, it's good to have some international currency that's kept in the lockbox that you can pull out for when you're going to Canada or you're going over to Europe, and you can grab some euros so that you've got something when you get off the plane. Limit who has access to checks and who has authority to write or sign the checks. The person who signs the check should not be able to print a check, and vice versa. You want to break this apart so that a fraud scheme would require 2 people colluding together, which limits the opportunity significantly. So you want to keep blank checks, any checks that you've got that are blank or that you use for that are printed. You want to keep the check stock somewhere under lock and key so that people don't have easy access to it. And only the person who can print the checks has access to the check stock, and then that's a different individual than the person who signs the checks. I have never been able to print checks at Service Nation, although when we first started out, we had a checkbook, so I could obviously write the checks. But as we grew as a company, I removed my ability to print a check so that we had a good check there. Positive Pay is something that a lot of banks have now, and I highly recommend it. We developed Positive Pay, or we enrolled in a Positive Pay program after we found a bunch of forged checks started appearing and were presented to our bank. And actually the bank said, look, if you don't go into Positive Pay, we're gonna stop covering these for you. So what happened was, one year we sent out rebate checks, and the rebate checks came back, and somebody had actually scanned the check, had printed their own checks, forged the signature, and was cashing these in different locations. So with Positive Pay, what's different about it is it means that we have to upload the check number and the amount to the bank, or the bank won't honor the check. Now, you can imagine there are all kinds of ways that this will result in gotchas. Somebody forgets to upload the checks, they forget to check them off. You send out checks, like hundreds of rebate checks, and fortunately it was just hundreds instead of thousands, and they all start bouncing because they weren't uploaded to Positive Pay. And so now you're sort of embarrassed because there's a lot of people who think you're bouncing checks. You have to explain to them what it is. You have to cover their bank fees, but it's a lot better than having having somebody out there forging your checks. I can tell you, another story from us, from our standpoint is, we got a call from a guy one time. He had found a bunch of our checks, blank checks, just blowing around in the wind, and he picked them up, and apparently they had fallen off a UPS truck, and there was some more that showed up later that the UPS driver had tried to kind of put the box back together. It clearly had broken open, and thankfully this guy, had found them and got them to us, or we would have had who knows how many checks just out blowing around in the by Highway 114 near the UPS station. Positive pay, if we'd had it at that point, that would have been no cause for concern. As it was, we were concerned for quite a while until we could account for all the checks. So I highly recommend it. Just understand that if you do positive pay, you're going to have glitches every now and then where somebody forgets to upload it. And usually what happens is every time we get a new bookkeeper who is responsible for doing this, we see, we go through at least one cycle where they forget to upload a few checks. I recommend using an outside CPA, and especially if you're a contractor, an outside CPA is useful because one of the things you can do is have the CPA balance your checkbook. Nobody likes balancing a checkbook, but you got the CPA to do it, and the CPA provides one additional set of eyes that you can trust going over everything. It's not that expensive, and if you're using an outside CPA, it can save you a lot on all kinds of tax and financial issues. CPAs catch things. They are really good at this. I'm not particularly good at it. That's why I use an outside professional. So I recommend using an outside CPA, and it's also good because you're paying them, and so they will do what you ask them to do. The whole point of a lot of this we've been talking about is establishing checks and balances and a division of control. So, you want to set it up so the person who writes the check can't sign the check. You want to set this up with every aspect of your business so that it involves more than one person to be able to do something that such as a vendor list. You need one person to prepare it, another person to review it. You always want to have checks and balances. You always want to have a division of control. That's just good business practice. And speaking of vendor lists, create an approved vendor list. You would be amazed at how often this comes up in fraud schemes where you got a vendor who appears and signing checks. You look at this guy, you're going, who is this? And it turns out that somebody in the company who's writing checks has a brother who's created a fictitious company, or they're writing checks to that company. There's invoices that come in. It looks legitimate. One of the ways you can fix this is make sure you've got an approved vendor list that you review at least every quarter, and make sure that the right companies are on it and you understand what each of them do. And if somebody's not on the approved vendor list, that generates a red flag, and you've got to check to make sure they're legitimate before you send a check to them. Similarly, you want an approved purchaser list with certain distributors and with certain accounts. So one of the common things is for guys that are doing side jobs is they'll go and buy parts and material using the company account and use it for their side jobs. And you want to make sure that if they're doing side work, they're at least using their own inventory and not yours. So you should go to your local distributor. You can tell them that only this guy is authorized to buy from our account. And you should also install a PO system. With contractors especially, I'm still surprised at how many of them do not have a purchase order system. Have a purchase order system so that you can track everything and you can follow the jobs. And if it doesn't have a PO, you're not going to pay for it.
Annie has a specific question on that as far as anyone best practice to limit customer fraud. Almost weekly we have fired customers that buy on their. Annie, you're on the call. Ask the question.
Oh, Colleen. Hey, Matt.
Hi,
And
Annie.
everyone. So almost weekly, we'll get an email from either, a branch manager that noticed the customer that came to the store have been buying on account of their employer. They just got fired. It could be 24, 48 hours ago. They literally, this guy that we find just had today, he's actually going to our multiple branches and get products. And we didn't know he was fired. So he's in the approved list. And at the end of the day, it'll take us a good 1 week to finally realize, hey, the same guy is shopping at multiple of our location, and then it kind of red flag the branch manager, and hence they send the email out to all of us. Do you guys have any best practices to make sure that doesn't explode or catch the fired employee as soon as possible? And not all vendors are good to say, oh, so and so got fired. It's probably the last thing on their mind when they let somebody go, but it's the first thing on our list when they come hit our store and get products.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it from the distribution perspective, which I can see your challenge there because you're at risk of irritating a good customer. But it's really the responsibility of the contractor to let you know. And so one of the things that you should do is give them some best practices. And frankly, every company should have a checklist for termination. We certainly have one. And if we have to terminate somebody, while we are having the termination discussion, we are executing the checklist. And the passwords are being changed, the email is being shut off, access to everything is gone, and we collect keys and everything else. Now, Service Nation, we don't really have an approved purchaser list or a PO system. So and we've got some areas where we are weak, which as I'm going through this, thinking about it, some things that we need to shore up, but we don't really have that. So, so it's not, we don't really have to go out and confirm this to suppliers. But if I'm a contractor and I know that I've got guys that are on a approved purchaser list, I want to make sure I cover that right away. And I'm going to send that information out immediately. At that point, it becomes your responsibility, because they've notified you. So you need to shut it down as quickly as you can. So you have to have a process in place to cover that through all your branches.
So right now what we do is, sorry, somebody speaking? So right now what we do, which is kind of our internal system, which is, so we communicate an email, all the managers knows it all, and then we have a tool called SB Klein. So when a contractor's account is being red flagged, we have notes there. Some of the notes will be like, oh, Matt Michelle has been shop at Webster store at this time and this date. Check driver's license, and things like that. As on the back end, we are contacting the customer and say, hey, is Matt still part of your approved list and stuff? And that's where we usually find out. But by then, we already lost quite a bit of money and we can't recover. And we have a lot of cameras around our warehouses. So when we have good pictures, we also send those pictures out to all the branches. And repeat offenders, we have pictures at the door. So to hinder him or her to come back and say, hey, we know we are watching you, so we're going to call the cops and stuff like that. But I was trying to think if there's more we could do in terms of, these are all, I know there's the term for it, but I don't know what's the term. Is it leakage or stockage or whatever it is?
Breakage.
Yeah. So it hurts our bottom line. But like sure. I say, every week I've got email like that, and I felt like I could do more. So this is something that, when Colleen and I started this, I said, hey, please record it. It's good. I want to share it with my credit manager and my branches to kind of what we are talking about today.
Well, part of what your burden is going to be to help train and educate your branches. And as I'm thinking about that, we'll put out some content. I'll get our team on it to put out some content for the Service Roundtable. But a terminated employee checklist. And if they've got that, then I mean, look, when you get on when a pilot flies a plane, he goes through his checklist every time because he wants to make sure he doesn't overlook something. Even if he knows it, can recite it by memory, he still goes down through the checklist. So if we can have a termination checklist with the contractors, then they're going to call and reach out to you as soon as the guy is let go.
Yep.
That helps. But you've got to get them to use it. And what you can do is make that, you can make that a requirement of having an account. I mean, the sales side, the sales side of me looks at that and think, okay, now you're putting a sales prevention barrier in place, but in reality, it's good for the contractor to do, and it's good for you to do. It's good for everybody.
Cool. Agree. Thank you.
Sure. Missing numbers should bother everybody, right? So if you're missing a check number, you're missing an invoice number, you're missing anything where you've got sequential numbers, you're missing a purchase order, those should be red flags. Now Excel has a way that you can find the missing numbers in any sequence. Just upload it to Excel, run through something like this, and you can identify that. Every missing number should be tracked down and explained. Stamp checks as soon as you get them, kind of goes without saying. Now we've got all these ways that you can scan checks and send them right in. So you've got that to actually short circuit this whole cycle. But I would still stamp them because you still got the check. But get it deposited as soon as possible. It's just another good practice. When you have and this is for contractors, when you've got turn downs, you should follow up. If not every one, then you should follow up on some of them. So what I'm talking about here is a contractor goes out, or the tech goes out, and he comes back and he says, all I got was a diagnostic. I presented the price, they didn't want to go for it, or they delayed it and they said they wanted to wait. Okay, so one of the practices that will happen, and I can tell you a firsthand story that happened with us, is we needed a new garage door. We called the company. The guy comes out, says, well, you know what, your garage door opener, you need that too. I'll replace the garage door on the call, but if you want to go and just buy your own garage door opener, I'll install it later for cash and it'll be a lot less. Right. So what the guy's doing is he goes back and he reports it as a turn down. This is actually theft in my view. So you've got the same thing that occurs, in HVAC and plumbing, where the guy goes out and says, they didn't opt for the work, and he's coming back over the weekend, or he's coming back, at night, and he's actually doing the repair, and he's charging them cash for it, or he's taking a check from them. And he's doing the work off list. So, call on turn downs. And if you see the same technician having a number of turn downs, that should be a red flag. So behavioral changes are another area. And we remember the shot we had on behavioral changes. So one of the things you should look for, if you've got people that are living beyond their means, somebody's got a brand new bass boat that costs $200,000 and the guy's making $50,000 a year, that's a huge red flag. Now, you're always going to hear stories of, I inherited some money, or, I sold something. I would be really careful though when you see something like that, and just, check where there are potential problems that could occur with that employee. If there aren't, great. You don't have to tell them that you're checking this stuff, but you should look. Also, be alert to other behavior changes. So when there's actually a process that when somebody starts to steal from the company, they go through this whole psychological series, and it ends up to where they're feeling incredible guilt, at least initially. They become irritable. They snap at people. They may start drinking a little bit more, or increasing their drug use. If a person just changes their behavior, that's a red flag. Now, it may be that they're going through, personal problems, issues with their family or their spouse, but it also may be that it's fraud. So just be on the lookout for that and be alert to it. Require everybody to take a vacation, even if it's a staycation. At least once a year, you get somebody out of their position, and somebody else is covering for what they're doing, and that is oftentimes, sometimes you uncover a fraud situation. Somebody doesn't want to take vacations. Somebody's always kind of the first to arrive, the last to leave in a certain area. It's, that's another one of those kind of red flags. So make sure everybody takes a vacation, even if all they're doing is staying at home, which is probably what we're all going to be doing this year, unfortunately. But make sure that they are vacating the premises for a week or so. Cross-train everybody. Everybody should be cross-trained. If you've got two people that know how to do the same job, you've got an automatic check built in. Check your company miles per gallon and for company vehicles, so that you don't have a situation where a technician is filling up the family car at the same time he's filling up his truck. And checking the miles per gallon is a good way to do that. You can check that either through your GPS or by looking at the miles driven and on GPS, comparing it to the gas purchases.
Before we had GPS, we had employees that were using our trucks to put their boats in the weekend. So they were hauling their boat to go fishing every night and hauling their boats over the weekend with the company vehicle.
Yeah,
another thing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, GPS has stopped a lot of that, and at first it was we were all kind of hesitant to add it, like it's like we didn't trust our guys, but I think now people are just it's accepted and it's understood. Security cameras should be in place. Annie, you talked about having them checking, in your warehouse. They should be in contractors' businesses as well, and any place where somebody is handling money or fooling around with the computers, there should be some cameras there. It's not Big Brother. It's just, the mere fact that the camera is there will prevent a lot of fraud, right? It's the thought that they might get caught. So just make sure that they're available. Also, I think vehicle dash cams are good, and this is good from a couple of perspectives. It helps you in case there is a wreck, and it might be a huge legal liability protector for you. If your guy didn't do anything wrong and somebody is trying to go after your company because of that, it also, you can look at the dash cams that are forward and rear viewing, so it shows that your technician was not texting on his phone at the time of the accident, and from a tech standpoint, it's good on helping them potentially get out of a ticket if they weren't doing anything wrong. It's an official record. So background checks. The very first background check that I do is a Google search. And we search social media, and you'd be amazed at what we've uncovered on Google and social media. We've had people that applied for work with us in a position that would handle money, that were actually had been arrested but had not yet been prosecuted, and we found the arrest report online, and before we even had to spend money on a background check, we could eliminate that person, and the arrest report was actually for embezzlement. So that was a good one to catch. We had one where we were hiring a guy to be a CSR position, and he would sit in have a cubicle, and he would be talking to our members, and that was essentially the job. And we go online and we see his social media post where he talks about his idea of hell is sitting in a cubicle, spending time on the phone all day. We eliminated him there. Had another guy one time, he didn't have anything on social media. He had no internet footprint. There was nothing about him that we could find anywhere. He was applying for a sales position, and that was a red flag to me. And so I talked to him about it, and I listened to him for a while, and I decided, okay, we'll go ahead and hire this guy. If you've got a salesperson who has no social media presence whatsoever, that should be a general red flag that maybe there's nothing wrong with the guy, but he's probably not going to be a good salesperson. And that certainly was the case with this guy. But you want to check the criminal records, drug tests, driving records, and you want to check their credit. Okay, because if somebody is credit challenged, they're people that are desperate do desperate things. Now, haven't always done this. I had one person that slipped through, and and I'll confess the story here. She was financially challenged. She was in a CSR position. She wasn't handling any money, any billing, anything like that. But a member called in. She took the call. He gave her his credit card and said, "I want you to update this for me." She wrote it down, and our process was that you enter this in. Once it's entered in the computer, we can't see it anymore, and you shred that paper. Well, she didn't do that. So she used that to pay her water bill, which was incredibly stupid. We caught her almost immediately. We covered the member, but from that point forward, we were always making sure we were doing a credit check as well. And we talked about tips. Utilize a fraud hotline. Now, we have one that we put together for the Service Nation Alliance. To be honest, we get very little activity on it. But the fact that it's there, it prevents a lot of fraud from occurring. Again, it's the idea that somebody might be looking over your shoulder that causes a lot of them to stop. And if anybody calls into this number, and we test it every so often, and we call in and just to make sure that our process is working. But if you have an anonymous hotline, that is one of the most effective ways at combating fraud. And if you have it and you promote it around your office, people are going to be less likely to attempt it to begin with. An interesting thing is when I'm looking at the statistics, if you have a reward for somebody to identify someone with fraud, it's not that effective. Just having the hotline is really what you need. So hotlines and reporting mechanisms, again, the presence of a hotline or other reporting mechanism covers how the organizations detect fraud in the outline of the case. 46% of the cases were detected by a tip when there was a hotline, only 30% when there was no hotline. So organizations with hotlines detect fraud more often. Okay, fraud losses are smaller for the organizations that have a hotline than those that don't, probably because they catch it sooner and it doesn't run on as long. Also, people are a little bit more comfortable using an anonymous hotline to report on their fellow employees than they are going to a manager or a boss, especially because they might be wrong. So organizations with hotlines are more than twice as likely to detect fraud by accident or by internal audit. So if you look at this, how did you find fraud? 40% were by a tip, then internal audits, management's review, accidents, and so on down the line. Who reported on the hotline? 53% were the employees, were another employee, 21% was a customer, and 14% were completely anonymous. You also had vendors and even competitors. If you look at this chart, you can see that the detective method, these were active detective methods that were employed by the company: IT controls, surveillance, account reconciliations, internal audits. They caught it much sooner and it was much less expensive. As time goes on, then here's the tip, which is really important, then external audits, then by accident, confession, or hear from the police. Now, I mentioned that there was a person who grabbed a credit card from one of our members. When that happened, we had her prosecuted, and it was a tough deal because she was a single mother with 2 kids, and her kids were taken into foster care as a result of this. But you know, we had her prosecuted because we needed to make that known to everybody, because it will prevent other people from being encouraged to do the same thing. And we will prosecute if there's fraud. And we try to make sure everyone knows that. We don't treat our employees poorly. We don't distrust them. In fact, we're very trusting. But if anybody violates that trust, we're going to be hard about it. And you should as well, because that will be a preventive measure all by itself. Now, before we conclude everything, I also want to talk about asset protection. And asset protection is another way of preventing fraud. A lot of times the fraud comes by way of your nighttime attorney advertising on TV. A good way of looking at asset protection is Larry Taylor, when he owned Air-Rite. Air-Rite had no assets. Air-Rite was a brand. The building was owned by another LLC and leased to Air-Rite. The trucks, Larry had a leasing company that he created, another LLC that leased the trucks to Air-Rite. Any money that showed up in Air-Rite was quickly moved out of Air-Rite and into another LLC. So the principle on this is you own nothing, you control everything. And you can do this with a good attorney and set up a series of LLCs or S corps or however you want to set it up. But you do it through different types of corporate shields, and you make it at the very least difficult for somebody to get any money from you. And once attorneys realize that it is difficult to collect, they're going to be more likely to just back off or settle, you know, for a very low amount. So practice asset protection schemes. You can find a lot about this on the internet. It is really worth reading up on it. And we've had speakers in the past that have talked about it. Now, one thing I'd like to do, Colleen, if you don't mind, give everybody a free gift. So we have an ebook that I've written. It's about 150 pages, very short chapters. It's written, you know, it's kind of written with me in mind. So it's for the attention deficit disorder people. And I'll send you a free copy if you just send me an email. Email address is at the bottom. And it's just tips and techniques on how to keep your attitude up and some strategies on how to handle all the craziness. And it'll work for bad economic times as well as a COVID world. So with that, thank you very much.
I had a question. I'm sure some other people do. I just put the email in the chat so you guys can grab that. I was wondering about time clock fraud.
When you have GPS on your trucks, you know, that's a good way of handling and recognizing people, and that's sort of automated and it's beyond the employee. But as far as somebody logging in and out in the office, you know, it's not one that I've really worried about a great deal. If somebody is doing that and if they're not working full hours but they're getting the job done, I'm kind of okay with it. For me, it's about getting the job done. And frankly, what I've had a problem with is I got people that work more hours and they don't report them all, and they should be paying them overtime for some of those hours. And I can't, you know, I've got one person right now who I know is working more than 40 hours every week, and I can't get her to report it. So, you know, for us, it's actually the opposite problem. But, you know, it's in the list of fraud possibilities, it's way down there for me. I also, you know, you got to be aware of expense report problems. I've seen it, you know, before. Territory managers, when I was working for a manufacturer, who you know, we found the exact same receipt multiple times. So, you know, they're creative. You know, and people are creative. If they've got larceny in their heart, there's not much you can do about it. It will eventually catch up to them. It's not a good answer for you. Sorry.
Well, I mean, like, it's a good problem to have for you guys. it's just something well, I want to say recently, several years ago, we had issues with this because what we do is a online clock-in system for any of our employees for online access and for our office employees up front for Vincent's Heating and Plumbing. So of course, we had a situation a couple of years ago where an employee was clocking in while she was at home from her phone, coming to the office, and then leaving the office after her workday and then clocking out like later in the evening. A little bit later, like so enough, but taking a lunch and stuff like that in between. So her hours were always excessive. So anyway, it was just one of those things we had to make new policies on about clocking in from your actual computer workstation, looking at the IP addresses, that kind of stuff. But working in COVID world where everybody's working remotely, it's a little bit of a different situation and it's harder to track. We have the best belief system, of course, as far as the best confidence in our employees, but it's always one of those things that now that we have to work remotely, it provides opportunity for people. And I would say this entire pandemic is a character revealing situation. And
Yeah,
I think I speak for a lot of people.
I would agree with that. We check to make sure the work gets done. And as long as the work is getting done, really, that's, to me, that's sort of the bottom line. If the work is getting done, we're in good shape. It's when the work doesn't get done that we have issues. So, but yeah, I realize that there's potential for abuse with this, but I would suspect that for most people who are working from home, I'm working more right now. I'm working harder. And I think that applies to a lot of our people on our team. And I've seen this with like my kids. I get up and I would do things before I went to the office and went to work. Today I get up and I'm at work, and I'm doing it until it's time to worry about dinner. And then a lot of times it's right back after that. And I don't know that I was quite as diligent when I wasn't working from home, if that makes sense.
Hey, Matt, this is Annie.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everyone know that you say you work from beginning until dinner. It's not like you're making dinner, right? You just sit down and eat.
No,
yeah. I was going to say, you make dinner. Annie, have you not seen this man's Facebook? Dear Lord. Yeah, no, he's making dinner too, so it's okay.
Nice.
Oh, okay, guys. Is there any other questions? And we went over a lot. I've got some good topics. Heck, that terminated employee checklist is something that I'm probably going to work on right now with our admin team. We have some stuff in place, but I think that could deal to be fleshed out just a little bit more. We have a recording of this, and I know that I've already gotten several text messages of people who wanted to attend but didn't. That's why I was on my phone, and I have an entire AB80 group that wants to see this presentation. So we're probably going to share it again and send it out to our members if that's okay with you, Matt.
Sure.
And if you guys would like a copy immediately, I can probably send one over, guys, for everybody that's here today. But I will be putting it up on the website eventually as well. So thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate your time. It was a great presentation.
Colleen, none of the images used were mine. I just kind of grabbed them quickly.
Fine.
Okay.
It's not going to affect anything as far as copyright like that. Not with PowerPoint presentations. No. We went over that in another call where we talked about copyright and PowerPoint, so you're good. I think that's everything. Thank you, Matt. Everybody has great comments in the chat as far as how grateful they are for your presentation. I know I learned a lot. And again, guys, have a fantastic weekend. We will see you next week for next Friday's call. I'm not really sure who we have as a guest next Friday. I wish I had this ahead of time, but I don't. And I think that's everything we have for today. So Matt, thank you again for your time. And we appreciate all the stuff that you shared with us today.
Thank you.
See you.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.